Welcome to She's Evolving. I'm Elena, a medical endocrinologist, and today we're stepping into the shadows a bit. We're going to talk about something that hits us in the quiet moments, the fears that suddenly appear or perhaps reappear with a new intensity once we cross that threshold of 40. And I'm Julia, a clinical psychologist. You know, Elena, they say 40 is the new 30, but our internal monologues didn't always get the memo. If you've ever woken up at 3 a.m. with your heart racing, wondering if you've missed your window, or if you've looked in the mirror and felt a sudden chill about the passing of time, this episode is for you. We're here to tell you that those fears are not only normal, they are part of the evolution. Before we dive in, if you find comfort in this conversation, please follow the podcast and share it with a friend who might need to hear that she isn't alone. It's funny you mentioned the 3 a.m. wake-up call, Julia. Because for me, it wasn't just a metaphor. It started about 3 years ago. I'm an endocrinologist. I literally spend my days explaining hormones to women. I know the mechanics of the body inside and out. But one night, I just sat up in bed, and this wave of pure, unadulterated dread washed over me. It wasn't about anything specific. It was just this heavy realization that the second half of my life had begun. And I suddenly felt like I was losing control of the very machine I'm an expert in, my own body.
That loss of control is such a recurring theme in my practice. For so many women, the 20s and 30s are about building a career, building a family, building a sense of self. We're so busy doing that we don't have time to be afraid. But then 40 hits and the dust starts to settle. We look around and realize the architecture is finished, and now we have to live in it. I remember when I turned 45, I went to a party. I was wearing a dress I loved. I felt great. But then I realized that the younger crowd in the room, the 20-somethings, didn't even see me. It wasn't that they were being rude. I just wasn't on the radar. That fear of becoming invisible hit me like a physical blow. It was a fear I thought I'd conquered in my teens, that do I belong here feeling. It came back, but with a much sharper edge. It's a biological betrayal, in a way. As an endocrinologist, I see it as the hormonal mirror. When our estrogen starts its slow, erratic decline in perimenopause, it doesn't just affect our periods or give us hot flashes. It actually recalibrates our brain's alarm system. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for the fight or flight response, becomes a bit more sensitive. So those old insecurities from high school, they aren't just coming back because of a midlife crisis. They're coming back because the chemical buffers that kept them at bay are shifting. That makes so much sense. It explains why women tell me they feel fragile all of a sudden. I had a patient last week, a high-powered executive, who told me she's suddenly terrified of public speaking, something she's done for 20 years. She said, "Julia, I feel like a fraud. I feel like everyone is going to realize I'm just an old woman who doesn't know what she's doing." That's the imposter syndrome returning, but now it's fueled by the fear of ageism.
And let's talk about the health fears. This is the big one I see in my clinic. Before 40, most of us treat our bodies like they're invincible. We skip sleep, we eat on the run, we push through pain. But after 40, every weird ache, every skip of the heart, every moment of brain fog becomes a potential catastrophe in our minds. The fear of the decline starts to take up space. I see women who are terrified of osteoporosis, terrified of their hearts, terrified of Alzheimer's because they saw their parents go through it. It's no longer a distant someday problem. It feels like it's knocking on the door. It's the fear of mortality dressed up in daily anxieties. In psychology, we talk about the sandwich generation stress. We are often looking up at our aging parents and seeing our future, while looking down at our children and seeing our past. We're squeezed in the middle. The fear that comes back is the fear of abandonment, not by others, but by our own vitality. We ask ourselves, will I be a burden? Will I be able to keep up? And the metabolism. Oh, Julia, if I had $1 for every time a woman told me she's afraid she'll never recognize her body again. It's not just vanity, it's a loss of identity. When your waistline changes or your skin loses its elasticity despite your best efforts, it feels like the you that you've known for 4 decades is evaporating. From a medical standpoint, I tell them, look, your insulin sensitivity is changing. Your muscle mass is harder to maintain. It's physics and chemistry. But I know that doesn't stop the emotional sting. Exactly.
And that leads us to a major myth we need to bust. The idea that these fears mean you're unstable or weak. I hear women say, I should be over this by now. But why? You're navigating a massive transition. We give teenagers grace for being moody and fearful during puberty because we know their bodies are changing. Why don't we give 45-year-old women the same grace?
That's a powerful point. We call it the change, but we rarely treat it with the respect a major life transition deserves. Let's look at one of the biggest fears that comes up, the fear of losing intimacy or desirability. I get asked all the time, Elena, is my libido just gone? Am I broken? There's this terrifying myth that after 50, you're basically a dried-up prune with no sexual future. And that is so damaging. Libido isn't a light switch that just breaks. It's more like a landscape that's changing its climate. Yes, the physiological drive might shift because of hormones, but the psychological drive, the need for connection, for being seen, for pleasure, that doesn't have an expiration date. The fear that we are no longer sexual beings is a societal lie we've swallowed. I've seen women in their 60s have the best sex of their lives because they finally stopped being afraid of what their bodies looked like and started focusing on how their bodies felt. I love that. Focusing on feeling rather than looking. Another fear that returns is the career dead end. I see women who are afraid to pivot or start something new because they feel the clock is ticking too fast. They think, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. But then the fear of failure keeps them paralyzed. It's the sunk cost fallacy. We feel like we've invested 20 years in one path and we're too old to start at the bottom of another. But the truth is, at 45 or 50, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. The fear of being too late is perhaps the most persistent ghost of all. I always ask my clients, if you live to be 90, you are only halfway through. Would you tell a 45-year-old man he's finished? Probably not. So why do we tell ourselves that?
It's true. We have this internal biological clock that we've been conditioned to listen to for reproduction, and we mistakenly apply it to our entire existence. We think if we aren't reproducing something, a child, a massive career milestone, a perfect image, then we are failing. But this stage of life is about distilling. It's about figuring out what actually matters. Let's talk about the fear of loneliness too. As children leave the nest or as friendships change because of different life stages, that old will I be alone fear from our 20s can return with a vengeance. But the after 40 version of this fear is different. It's deeper. It's about the fear of not being needed anymore. I felt that when my oldest went to college. I was a doctor, a wife, a mother, and suddenly one of those roles was drastically downsized. I felt this void, and into that void stepped all these old insecurities. Am I still interesting? Who am I if I'm not mom every hour of the day? It took me a while to realize that this was an opportunity to redefine my relationship with myself. And that's the key, isn't it? Redefinition. We spend so much energy trying to fight the fear or hide the changes. We buy the creams, we push ourselves at the gym until we're exhausted, we try to act young. But what if we leaned into the fear? What if we said, yes, I am afraid of aging. Yes, I am afraid of my body changing. And that's okay. That's where the healing starts. From a medical perspective, I always tell my patients that stress is the greatest accelerator of aging. If you spend your 40s and 50s in a state of constant fear and cortisol spiking anxiety about your health, you're actually creating the very issues you're afraid of. Learning to breathe through the fear, to nourish the body instead of punishing it, changes the hormonal landscape. It lowers the cortisol and allows the body to find a new equilibrium.
It's a shift from anti-aging to pro-evolving. I hate the term anti-aging. It implies that aging is a disease we need to cure. It's not. It's a privilege. Many don't get to do it. When we reframe it that way, the fears start to lose their teeth. The fear of invisibility becomes the freedom of not caring about the male gaze or societal expectations. The fear of physical change becomes a journey of discovering what our bodies can do now. Maybe it's yoga, maybe it's hiking, maybe it's just sleeping better because we finally learned to set boundaries. I remember a patient of mine, she was 54. She came in terrified because she was gaining weight around her midsection, the classic perimenopausal shift. She was devastated. She said, "I feel like I'm disappearing into this new shape." We worked on her nutrition and hormones, but the real breakthrough was when she said, "You know, this extra weight is actually protecting my bones. It's my body's way of storing a little extra estrogen." She stopped seeing her body as an enemy and started seeing it as a brilliant system that was trying to protect her. That is a beautiful shift. It's about moving from a place of lack to a place of abundance. We think we are losing our youth, but we are gaining our wisdom. We are gaining a BS detector that is incredibly sharp. We are gaining the ability to say no without explaining ourselves. Those fears that return, the insecurity, the imposter feelings, they are just echoes. They don't have the same power they had when we were 20 unless we give it to them. And for the women listening who are scared of the health stuff, the what ifs, I want to say, knowledge is the antidote to fear. Don't Google your symptoms at 2 a.m. Talk to a professional. Get your blood work done. Understand your family history. When you have a plan, the fear shrinks. You realize that while you can't control everything, you can influence so much of how you age.
And talk to each other. That's why we're doing this podcast. Shame and fear thrive in silence. When you realize that the woman sitting next to you at the coffee shop or the woman leading the board meeting is also wondering if she's enough, the fear becomes a bridge rather than a wall. We are all in this massive, beautiful, messy evolution together.
It's true. Every wrinkle tells a story of laughter or worry, and every gray hair is a badge of survival. We've made it this far, Julia. That's not something to be afraid of. That's something to celebrate.
Exactly. We're not the same women we were at 20, and thank goodness for that. I wouldn't trade my 53-year-old brain for my 23-year-old body for anything in the world. The clarity I have now is worth every laugh line.
As we wrap up today's conversation, I want to leave you with a thought. Your body is not a house that's falling apart. It's a landscape that's changing seasons. Autumn is just as beautiful as spring, just in a different, deeper way. The fears you're feeling, they are just the wind rustling the leaves. They don't change the strength of the tree. And remember, you are the architect of this next phase. You get to decide what 40 and beyond looks like for you. It doesn't have to look like a magazine cover, and it doesn't have to look like your mother's experience. It looks like you. If you're feeling those old fears creep back in, acknowledge them, give them a seat at the table, and then remind them that you're the one in charge now. Thank you for joining us on She's Evolving. This conversation is just the beginning. We have so much more to explore, from the science of sleep to the art of reclaiming your joy. If this episode spoke to you, please subscribe and share it. Let's start a movement of women who aren't afraid to grow older, but are excited to grow better.
You aren't alone in this. We are right here with you, navigating the same waters, facing the same ghosts, and realizing, one day at a time, that the best version of us is the one we are becoming right now. Keep evolving, keep questioning, and above all, keep being kind to yourself. Until next time, take a deep breath. You've got this, and we've got you. See you in the next episode. The music swells, a warm, uplifting piano melody that carries the weight of the conversation into a place of hope. The sound of the two women laughing softly as they put down their mugs lingers for a second before fading into a peaceful silence. The episode ends, leaving a sense of calm and empowerment in its wake, like a long overdue conversation with a dear friend. The narrator's closing note. The journey through the 40s and 50s isn't about avoiding the dark corners of our minds. It's about bringing a flashlight. Elena and Julia have shown us that while fear is an inevitable visitor, it doesn't have to be a permanent resident. By combining the hard science of our changing bodies with the soft grace of psychological understanding, we can turn the midlife crisis into a midlife awakening. The fears of invisibility, decline, and irrelevance are just the old skin we are shedding. Underneath is something tougher, brighter, and infinitely more resilient. As you move through your day, remember that every change you feel is a sign of life, and every fear you face is an opportunity to grow. You are not fading away. You know, Elena, as we navigate this conversation about hormones and physiology, there is a specific category of fears that I see resurfacing in my office. Fears that many women thought they had conquered in their 20s or even their childhood, only to find them knocking on the door again at 45 or 50. It's almost like a second adolescence, but with much higher stakes. One of the biggest myths we need to dismantle right now is the idea that by this age, we should have figured it all out, and therefore we shouldn't feel afraid anymore. That is so true, Julia. From a medical perspective, I see this manifest as a hyper-awareness of the body. When we are 20, a racing heart is just excitement or too much caffeine. At 50, a racing heart, even if it's just a common menopausal palpitation, triggers a profound fear of mortality. It's a return of that primal fear of the unknown. Women come into my clinic asking, "Is my body failing me?" And behind that question is a deep-seated anxiety about the future.
Exactly. And let's talk about one of the most common myths, the fear that our best years are behind us, especially regarding intimacy and desire. I often get asked, "Julia, is it true that libido just disappears after 50? Am I going to lose that connection with my partner forever?" This is a fear of abandonment, really. A fear that if we aren't the vibrant young things society prizes, we will no longer be desired or loved. And the answer, medically and emotionally, is a resounding no. While it's true that the decline in estrogen and testosterone affects the physical drive and the speed of arousal, it doesn't delete the capacity for pleasure. The myth is that sex is only for the young. The reality is that for many women, this stage is the first time they actually feel comfortable enough in their own skin to communicate what they truly want. It's not the end of desire, it's the beginning of intentional pleasure. But we have to move past the fear of our changing bodies to get there. I love that, intentional pleasure. Another fear that returns is the fear of social inadequacy. I call it the invisible woman syndrome. Many women tell me that as they age, they feel like they are becoming translucent in public spaces. They fear that their voice no longer carries weight in meetings, or that they aren't noticed in a room full of younger people. This triggers that old teenage fear of not belonging. But here's the secret. That invisibility can actually be a superpower. How so? I'm curious to hear the psychological take on that.
Because when you stop living for the gaze of others, when you realize you don't have to perform for the approval of a society that prizes youth, you are finally free. The fear of being invisible is actually the fear of losing a mask we've worn for 30 years. Once that mask falls away, you find out who you really are. You stop being a daughter, a mother, or an employee first, and you start being yourself. That resonates so much. In my field, I see women fearing the brain fog. They fear they are developing early onset dementia because they can't remember where they put their keys or they lose a word mid-sentence. I want to tell everyone listening, most of the time, that is the fluctuation of hormones affecting your cognitive processing speed. It's not a loss of intelligence. It's a temporary recalibration. The myth is that we are losing our minds, but the truth is our brains are simply restructuring for a new phase of life. It's about rebranding that fear into a transition. We also need to address the sandwich generation fear, the overwhelming anxiety of caring for aging parents while still guiding teenage or young adult children. It's the fear of being squeezed dry. Many women at 45 or 55 feel they have no self left because everyone else's needs are so loud. And that fear often manifests as physical exhaustion or chronic insomnia. They lie awake at 3 a.m., which we know is a classic hormonal symptom, but their minds fill that space with worries about their mother's health or their son's career. It's a heavy burden. It is. And the antidote to that fear is boundaries. It's the hardest thing to learn at 50 if you didn't learn it at 20. We fear that saying no will lead to conflict or loss of love. But in reality, saying no is what preserves our health so we can actually be there for the people we love.
As we move toward the end of our talk today, I want to touch on the fear of it's too late. Too late to change careers, too late to start a marathon, too late to find a new love, or too late to heal a relationship. That is perhaps the most paralyzing fear of all, the sunk cost fallacy, feeling like because we've spent 20 years on one path, we must stay on it until the end. But look at us, Elena. We are in our 50s, and we are starting this podcast. We are evolving every single day. Exactly. Evolution doesn't have an expiration date. Your body is changing, yes. Your hormones are shifting, yes.
But your spirit and your capacity to reinvent yourself are more potent now than they ever were in your 20s, because now you have the wisdom of experience. So, to the woman listening who feels that old fear of not being enough or running out of time, we want you to take a deep breath. Look in the mirror and see not the wrinkles or the changes, but the history of a woman who has survived 100% of her hardest days. You are still here. You are becoming a more refined, powerful version of yourself. This journey after 40 isn't a decline, it's a distillation. You are becoming more of who you were always meant to be. If your body feels different, listen to it, care for it, but don't fear it. It's your vessel for the most exciting half of your life. We hope this conversation has shed some light on those shadows. Remember, you aren't losing yourself. You are shedding what no longer fits. You are evolving, and that is a beautiful, albeit sometimes scary, process. But you don't have to do it alone. Thank you for joining us on She's Evolving. If this episode spoke to you, if it eased a fear or sparked a thought, please share it with a friend who might need to hear these words today. Let's build a community where we talk about these things openly and with love.
Subscribe to the podcast to keep evolving with us. We have so much more to talk about, from the science of sleep to the art of starting over. Until next time, be kind to yourself and embrace the change. Because you aren't just aging, you are evolving. See you in the next episode. Goodbye, everyone. Take care of your hearts and your minds.